Bienvenidos a todos al Consejo Municipal. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I'm going to make a few announcements. Well, why don't we just start with introductions? I'm Councilman Paul Lopez. I have the honor to represent the West Side on the Denver City Council, District 3.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Stacy Gilmore, District 11, the front door to Denver.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Wayne New, District 10.
Chris Arden, District 8, Northeast Denver. Good morning.
Good morning, Rafael Espinoza, District 1, and I too had the honor of representing Northwest Denver.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Paul Cashman, South Denver, District 6.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Mary Beth Sussman, District 5, East Central Denver.
Good morning, Kevin Flynn, Southwest Denver, District 2.
Robin Kinich, at large.
And
Deborah Bartleson, City Council staff.
all right, so the first things first, I want to make sure folks understand. Okay, I want to make sure folks know that there's overflow available on the fourth floor on the City Council chambers. That's 451. For safety reasons, we cannot we can't be standing around the room. So you know, please move to the council chambers if you find yourself without a seat. We also have interpretation services for folks that are speaking today, both here at our table and at the podium. Make sure you speak so that the interpreter can catch up. Let me see what else. So Hilda and Luis, you guys are the interpreters. Thank you for continuing the conversation from July 19th. Let me just open this by saying, just by reminding folks why we're here. Today's committee is a continuation of July 19th, of the last committee that we had, and the conversation that we've been having in the community with colleagues and the administration. At the core of these conversations, at the very core of these conversations and these discussions is how do we increase safety? How do we protect public safety? And there's something that was that I overheard a conversation that one of my colleagues was having when they said, "Why do you do this?" And he said to restore our faith in government, right? At its very core, and that's what we want to do, to restore that public trust in local government for everybody in Denver. Through this process, it's become clear that some of our residents are less likely to report crime, interact with city services, city departments, and testify in our courts when they are unsure of the city's interaction with the federal government, in particular with ICE. Recently, the 538 article that I left in boxes and referred to found that crime reporting decreased by 12% by Latinos in our own city when it is increased for all the other demographics. It is absolutely unacceptable that our constituents, no matter what zip code they live in, feel unsafe. No matter where they're from or what their last names are, who they look like, feel absolutely unsafe. And this bill that we have before us reverses these trends by clearly stating what our roles are and what they are not. And let me just tell you that this bill that you have in front of you, this bill is a manifestation of months of hard work. It represents trust. It represents community trust. It represents input from several departments, input from our colleagues, input from the administration. This bill represents that balance, that community. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to my colleague and my co-sponsor on this bill, Councilwoman Kinich. And let me just, before I do that, let me just make sure that we welcome the other co-sponsor on our bill, Joel and Clark, to the table, and Councilwoman Black to the table as well too, and then our other co-sponsor, Debbie Ortega, she's not here yet, but Councilwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just let folks know kind of what's going to happen next. I'm going to run through the bill. We are going to take a public comment session. Our hope is that we can do some discussion, and then our hope is that we can go into an executive session by about 11:20. This is unusual, and for the members of the public, I'm going to apologize, but you're going to have to leave the room for the executive session. What that means is that we can then go ahead and discuss with our attorney some privileged questions that might be legally sensitive, and then folks can come back in. We can continue the conversation, and it is our hope that if this committee is ready, we will have a motion to move the bill forward. So that discussion that we have after session will be open again. So we're going to figure out those logistics and ask for some patience. When you do need to exit, you need to go all the way to the hallway. So we will let you know those directions when that time comes. So just watch the clock. With that, I want to just kind of go over some pieces of the bill. As Paul mentioned, as Councilman Lopez, my good friend, so it's hard. We often use first names in our body, but my colleague Councilman Lopez mentioned there's something special about the legislative process, and many of the concerns and ideas for this bill came from members of the community who are directly impacted or those who are in their families and working really closely with them. There are things in the bill that are very important to them. The very clear prohibition on engaging in civil immigration enforcement, for example. There are things in the bill that are very important to the community. There are also things that were important to the community that did not make the bill or that were changed due to feedback from other folks. Those have not been easy changes for some of the folks that are feeling impacted by these issues. And I just want to acknowledge that, because what I'm going to be going over today is mostly changes made to this bill at the request of departments of the city. So I don't want to lose track as I focus on that there were other voices involved, but it's going to sound, and we're going to focus on changes that came from the agencies. So with that, I want to dive in. You'll see the newest piece of the bill since last time you saw it is the whereas statements. This is what provides both our the moral imperatives that move us to act, as well as some of the legal basis, right? That there is an emergency of safety with people not reporting crimes, and that gives us the authority to act as a council. So the whereases are really important for laying the groundwork. As we go into the bill, the first section, section 250, we've made, you can see, and this is, I'm going to refer to the page that you have with the highlighting. So if you want to get this handout, we'll do a side-by-side. Section 250 includes the most changes that we made based on feedback from agencies of the city and the administration. 3 of those changes are highlighted in yellow. 2 of those changes had to do with prisoner transport. If someone is already in the custody of Immigration and Customs Enforcement and they are transporting through our jail, through our courthouse, through our airport, this bill will not interfere with that transport. That's the intent of those changes. Also, the clarification, I don't believe the bill ever necessarily prohibited our police from engaging in joint enforcement actions with federal agencies on gangs and drugs, but we made it very clear, even if ICE happens to tag along in those enforcement actions, if the primary purpose is gangs and crime, and that word primary is key, then we will continue to participate in those types of enforcement actions. So those changes are all in Section 250. I want to highlight a change that I'm going to propose at the end of this meeting as an amendment. We continue to receive feedback, and one of the things that our safety department is concerned about is making sure that if we have someone who's being stopped by the police and they're checking out what's in the system, they check national databases to see if there are warrants or other things for folks. They may have indications that there's something in the federal system that might require them to hold a person, and it might take time to determine whether or not that's criminal or whether there's a warrant, whether there's not, whether it's an ICE hold of some sort. So in Section 5, in my page, it's page 4. So we're in Section 250, subsection 5. It's the middle of page 4. I think our safety departments would be somewhat comforted to know that time spent determining probable cause is not a violation of this ordinance. Time spent determining what's going on is not a violation. So that is something that I hope to propose as an amendment, with David Broadwell doing the drafting after we leave council. So that is Section 250. So this is, as David described, this is a bill that begins with a you shall not share information, engage in immigration enforcement, and then the rest of the bill is exceptions. The rest of the bill are the things that we need to be able to do to keep the city flowing, to comply with federal law. Okay? So Section 251, no changes have been made to that section. Section 252, this deals with the jail and other secure facilities. We did not make any changes since we were here last, but I do want to make folks just underline the fact that right now, ICE is only requesting phone interviews of inmates. For 2017, they have only been requesting phone interviews of inmates. Those requests are allowed to continue under this bill, and they will receive an advisement of their rights. So that is not that phone interview piece was already in here last time you saw the bill, but I just want to clarify that they still have the power to do phone interviews. Next section is 253. This is the section dealing with notifications from the jail. So you need to go all the way to page 8 to find the change that was made in this section. So in the past, this section required a verbal attestation, it required a written attestation about threats to national security. And according to the city attorney, that is not something that our federal enforcement agencies are willing to do. They won't tell us why they're asking about someone. They consider that to be classified information. And so what you can see here is that in the middle of page 8, you see section D, number 1, if an individual, an official from Homeland Security Investigation Divisions, that is the Division of Homeland Security that handles these matters, right? So Immigration and Customs Enforcement is one division of Homeland Security. This Homeland Security Investigations Division is the other division. They handle these other issues. If they request a notification, they will receive it under this bill. So this is the broadest possible exception. They don't have to provide anything. And so we believe this is a very rare exception, right? I will want to just remind folks of one other piece of this bill, because it's spread throughout, which is that anytime Immigrations and Customs Enforcement presents a warrant, the city will comply. A criminal warrant that comes from a judicial or a magistrate with a signature. And so that exception runs through, we can hold people over their sentence if they have a warrant for their arrest that is judicial. We can give notification if there is a judicial warrant. We can provide information. So that judicial warrant serves as the foundation by which we are respecting the powers of ICE to do its job. When they get a warrant and they've demonstrated to a judge that they have the right person, that they have probable cause, and that the warrant is issued, it is an exception to every piece of the limitations. So I would like to stop there and see if David Broadwell has anything he would like to add in terms of just going over the bill as a basic summary.
I don't have anything to add. That's a good overview of what has changed from last committee meeting till today. I am available to answer questions as we go along. Most of my input to you all is going to be in the executive session in terms of some of the legal issues surrounding the adoption of the bill. Obviously, my name's on the bill as drafter, and as you'll note, the standard certificate at the end says we have no legal objection there too in signing the bill, right? So just kind of on the global issue of whether or not the bill is within our legal authority as a city to adopt, that's certainly what my signature on the bill represents, as an affirmation that it's legal. Thank you.
Thank you. And then we do have some city agencies in the audience, but one of the things that they have shared with us is that some of the questions we've asked are quite complex and sometimes get into some sensitive law enforcement tactical things. So the request is that we might be having questions answered either by the attorneys, or we might ask folks to follow up with agencies after the meeting rather than kind of having them go through some tactical things that may be a little longer than we have time for today. But they certainly are here in the room. And so with that, I'll turn it back to the councilman for public comment.
Thank you. And I know we had one thing, and welcome Council President Brooks to the table. You had lifted your finger for a quick question. You want to?
Yeah, just a quick question. On the phone interviews, I don't know, I think the sheriff's office can answer this, or you as well. Today, this is going on, so I'm wondering, are folks advised of their rights today for all interviews? Okay.
Yes, and
Yes,
they've
they are.
provided us a copy of the notification that they've been using, and this was something that the CIRC, I believe, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, helped to work with the jail to achieve as a practice. But if there are further questions, I don't see, is the sheriff here? Oh, Andrea's here. Yes,
Andrea's.
Andrea's nodding yes.
Great, thank you.
And we'll take, and thank you for that question. I appreciate that clarification. We're going to have a period where we want to have a Q&A. Let me just kind of remind folks of the flow. We do have a public comment, and the folks that just walked in the room, I just want to remind you that, there is overflow capacity upstairs in room 451. We can't have folks standing around in the doorways or standing in the room, so just know that, just for safety reasons. So there you have it. This is the Public Safety Enforcement Priority Act, and what we're going to do now is have 15 minutes of public comment. We had folks that had signed up. We have 19 speakers. Know that there is only 2 minutes, folks, and I think, in order to try to get as much public comment in the record, try to keep. You don't have to take up that whole 2 minutes. We will follow that by council questions and discussions on the bill, and then our executive session. And no, folks, and I just want to make this clear, executive session does not mean adjournment. We have executive session to talk about attorney-client privileges and to be briefed on that, on the topic. And then we ask that you go upstairs because there are TVs there, live TVs. When we know, we're working with Channel 8 to kind of give us that signal. When we get out of executive session, we will let you all know. You can come back in the room, and we'll continue our meeting. So,
Brief change of plans. We as a council and our attorneys will relocate so that the public can stay put. So we're going to go upstairs to our council. We're going to go up to our council chambers. So
I'm glad you said that because I kind of felt weird, the
Sorry.
few of us and a whole bunch of
credit
you, so.
credit to Councilman Cashman for making a very logical suggestion that is very easy to implement.
There's no putting tax on chairs when we come back. So why don't we do this? Why don't we start with our public comment? I'll call up the first 3 speakers. If you can come right here, come to the podium, and the 3 can kind of wait on the side. So the first up, we have Rabbi Gerson. Are you? There you are, sir. So why don't you go ahead? Welcome. 2 minutes.
Good morning, esteemed councilmen, and good morning, everyone. My name is Bernard Gerson. I have served for 24 years as the rabbi of Congregation Rodef Shalom on Denver's east side, and more recently, for the past 5 years, have participated as a faith leader in the Metro Denver caucus of Together Colorado. Although not a native of Denver, I have come to embrace this city as my home and love the sense of safety and trust that is developed between me and my neighbors in the Winston Downs neighborhood. We watch each other's homes for suspicious activity, take care of one another when a loved one is sick, and have seen gradual turnover in the area as those who built their homes in the 1950s and 60s are selling to younger families. Although not the most diverse neighborhood in the city, we are proud of the way in which we accept newcomers regardless of where they might have resided beforehand. My faith tradition makes no bones about the importance of welcoming strangers. The book of Leviticus commands us that when strangers live with you in your land, you shall not do them wrong. The strangers who sojourn with you shall be with you as the natives among you, and you shall love them as yourself. In our history, as a people, Jews have lived in someone else's land far longer and wider than we have resided in our own homeland. And I recall personally the immigrant experiences of my own family, who came to this country in the early 20th century, seeking safety and freedom from persecution. They were free to settle in outlying districts of the city of Boston, Massachusetts, and planted seeds that led to their eventual integration as American citizens. Today, amidst the complications of larger populations and more sophisticated avenues of assimilation, we have no less of an obligation to advocate for a law enforcement system that treats all people, immigrants and non-immigrants alike, with respect, and that affords them a basic guarantee of security from wrongdoing. It is incumbent upon us as a moral community to defend the rights of all, to believe in the possibility of rehabilitation and a fresh start in life. Once someone has completed their responsibilities in the criminal justice system,
I don't mean to interrupt, but your time is up, so if you want to end with the
deportation
sentence.
should not exist as a secondary punishment. May God bless all of your efforts.
Yeah. All right, and just make sure that we pay attention to Deb. Deb's with the card, so I don't want to interrupt, and I don't want to get hit by lightning after this walking out. So, he interrupted a rabbi. Next up is Giovanna Gutierrez. And then Dr. Robert Davis and Joy Athanasiou. Welcome. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Giovanna Gutierrez, and I'm here representing the Latina Leadership Coalition. I've been working as a bilingual advocate for 7 years now. And here's what I have seen in the last 7 months working with immigrant survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. There has been greater hesitation to come to the court to file civil protection orders or even to file divorce. Fear of deportation, not only of themselves, but their family members. Domestic violence survivors want the abuse to stop, but they also want to have access to DV services. Very often, families are reliant on dual incomes, and in cases where someone is not permitted to work, ICE can really have a hold on their economic situation. It would become really hard to meet even basic necessities. I recently worked with a DV survivor who was arrested at a protection order hearing. She was arrested on a traffic violation. Immediately after her arrest, ICE came in and began with deportation process. She wasn't convicted, yet she still was deported. She was looking for safety for her family, for her children. And she deserved the right to be protected and to be safe. We have told immigrant survivors for decades, especially since the passage of Violence Against Women Act, that they will be safe to report a crime, that they will not suffer in silence, and they do deserve to be safe in their home and their community. We are failing to keep this promise. We know U-Visa applicants have been deported within the past 7 months. We know that government is not honoring U-Visa application process and no longer suspending deportation proceedings if someone has been witness on a criminal case. The victims who act as witnesses on a criminal prosecution are afraid to come forward, and this has decreased prosecution rates.
Thank you. Time is up. Thank you. So when you hear that 30 seconds, know that, wrap up your statement. I don't want to interrupt anybody, but wrap up your statement, and then that way we don't have to interrupt anybody. All right. Next up, welcome, Dr. Robert Davis.
Good morning, councilmen and council members. My name is Robert Davis. Oh, no one has ever told me to have to speak up. Okay. My name is Robert Davis. I'm the pastor of the Denver Park Hill Seventh-day Adventist Church, as well as the vice president for social justice for the Greater Metro Denver Ministerial Alliance. And I just want to do like my rabbi friend, address from a spiritual, philosophical perspective the proposal that is presented today. And that being very simple, we have to be very conscientious about the way that we treat the foreigners that are among us. I especially take this into consideration, considering the fact that as African Americans, when we were first brought over here as immigrants ourselves, we were very conscientious about the way that we were treated by the established government of the time. And so it is incumbent upon us that we are very conscientious about the way others who come to this country are treated or mistreated. And so I want to end just by simply reciting the scripture from Deuteronomy to follow up on what the rabbi said. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 10, verse 17. It says, "For the Lord your God is God of gods and the Lord of lords, the great God, mighty and awesome, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourselves were foreigners in Egypt." Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Davis. So the next three, let's start with Joy Athanasiou, then Narig Ibrahim, Thean Sandos, and Louis Irwin. Yeah, go for it. The floor is yours.
Good morning. My name is Joy Athanasiou. I am an immigration attorney and immigration advocate, and I just wanted to raise a couple of legal issues with the proposed ordinance today. The first thing I would like to do is tell you that the ordinance complies fully with federal law and with the U.S. Constitution. As the Denver City Council, your job, number one, is to enact laws and policies in the best interest of Denver residents and to protect Denver residents and to protect Denver tax dollars. This ordinance does just that. Your duty, number two, is to comply with the U.S. Constitution at all times. This ordinance does that. Your job, number three, is also to comply with and not be inconsistent with federal law or state law. This ordinance does that as well. This ordinance simply says that we are not going to violate the Constitution simply because the federal government is asking us to. That our job is to our taxpayers and our job is to uphold the Constitution, regardless of what's happening on the state level or regardless of what's happening on the federal level. There have been multiple decisions around the country holding that detainers violate the Constitution. There have also been a couple of decisions recently addressing the information sharing under notification, under release date, and under other issues with regard to Section 1373. Section 1373 simply says you cannot enact a policy that prohibits the sharing of immigration status or citizenship status. That's it. It does not address any information above and beyond that. And just like with detainers, there is a 10th Amendment concern with giving more information than what the law allows.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next up is Nadine Ibrahim. If you want to come to the podium. 2 minutes. Welcome.
Thank you. Oops, sorry. My name is Nadine Ibrahim, and I'm an immigrant who is now a citizen. I'm also a leader in Denver's Muslim community and an appointee to Denver's Immigrant and Refugee Commission. Today, I can only represent myself, though I can assure you that our Muslim community is currently reviewing the Council's proposal to explore ways in which we, as an entire community, can further support this proposed bill so that it becomes law. After reviewing this bill, it became clear to me that this work is extremely important to the communities I serve and represent, and I'm in full support of it. The proposal takes significant measures to make our community safer and measures that also begin to restore public trust with our city officials and representatives. I've spent this past year engaging with government and nonprofit leaders to voice out concerns of some of Denver's most vulnerable members. In every conversation, at the top of the list of concerns are community safety and emotional well-being. Today, Denver's ability to keep the city safe is at great risk. How can people feel supported and protected when accessing law enforcement agencies when city administration sends confusing messages to the public? One community I work particularly closely with is the Arab refugee community, which are primarily Syrian and Iraqi refugees. Given the recent media segments and lack of clarity in said policies, a number of these families have voiced how scared they are to utilize these services, such as law enforcement, as they fear the possibility of being returned to refugee camps. As an advocate with English-speaking abilities, I'm able to dispel this misinformation when I hear it from a resettled refugee family, though the reality is that my messaging is only supported by an internal city practice and I cannot reference that I cannot reference because it is not publicly available like an ordinance would be. Passing this proposal will ensure uniform, clear, community safety-oriented policies that can be accessed by the public at any time and translated accordingly. So as you can see, this proposed policy would not only inspire public safety for Denver immigrants and the Latino population. Thank you.
Thank you. Tian Sandos? Yeah. And we only have a few more minutes, so let's try to get as much public comment in the next few minutes.
Thank you. My name is Theanne Sandos. I am a native of Denver, and I live in Council District 7. Like many in Denver, I'm appalled by Trump's harmful rhetoric and am extremely concerned with the impacts of increased ICE presence on Denver's most vulnerable residents. I'm also worried that the ICE presence in Denver will have a perverse effect on the safety of our community by creating a distrust of the police. I know that Mayor Hancock and the Denver Police are committed to keeping all of Denver's residents safe, so I'm urging the City Council to take the next step and vote yes for the Public Safety Enforcement Priorities Act in order to codify our current practices and ensure the safety of all of Denver's residents. And I would like to thank the council members for listening to their constituents' concerns and sponsoring this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandos. Louis Irwin?
My name is Lou Irwin. I am chair of the Public Policy Committee of the Democratic Party of Denver. In our Criminal Justice Study Group meeting, we devoted most of an entire meeting to looking at this proposed act in detail. Then we discussed it to a substantial degree in a full meeting of the Public Policy Committee. The overwhelming consensus in both meetings was to strongly support this act. We feel that it goes about as far as it can in representing and implementing our values, the values that we support in our immigrant communities, promoting a sense of safety and security. At the same time, it does not contravene federal law or the Constitution, as a previous speaker detailed. And thirdly, it does not harbor dangerous, violent criminals in our midst. So for those three reasons, we are strongly in accord and we urge your support of this act. Thank you.
Next up, Lisette Chacon, Victor Galvan, Sarah Marsden. And we only have a few more minutes, so why don't we hustle up so we can get this through? And then we're going to be on time. So please make your way to the podium. Lisette Chacon, Victor Galvan, and Sarah Marsden. Victor, I think that's yours.
Hello, Council. Thank you for having me today. My name is Victor Galvan Ramirez. I live in District 8. And I want to ask you to support and pass this out of committee. And really, I do work in the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition and the Immigrant Rights Movement, but my work comes from a deep level of understanding of how this affects people personally, how this impacts people of color, people who are directly impacted by immigration. At a young age, I discovered that it is so important to have trust in your police, because I saw that not having confidence in law enforcement didn't give my mom the confidence to call the police when my father put hands on her. I remember her screaming at my older brother, urging him not to call the police. We didn't know at the time, but later realized it was because she knew that if police were involved in our domestic dispute, that we would end up in deportation proceedings. It is so important because in Colorado, both parties are arrested to figure out who is the victim and who is the victimizer. It was important for her to know that police would be able to go into our home, take custody of my father and herself to protect her and us, making sure that there wasn't going to be notification to Immigration and Customs Enforcement, making sure that there wasn't going to be a detainer on her based on her immigration status, and making sure that she could work with law enforcement to later fix and adjust her status because she was a victim of a crime. This is so crucial to not only immigrant women, but all women in Colorado. Put your mothers, your wives, your sisters, your daughters in those positions and ask yourself if you would not pass this policy for them.
Thank you. All right, so we're only going to take 2 more, and then we got to go into, we got to proceed forward. So Lisette Chacon and Sarah Marsden, and then we are out of time for public comment.
Thank you. My name is Lisa Chacon. I'm the Executive Director of Colorado People's Alliance, but I'm going to read a testimony from one of our members. My name is Renato Fierro. I'm a member of Colorado People's Alliance. As someone with DACA who briefly had to continue living in my life without a valid deferred action for childhood arrivals work permit after USCIS failed to process my renewal on time, I understand the fear and stress of simply living under this administration with no legal protection. Every trip to the grocery store, every drive to work, and every community meeting is a risk. You never know when you might be collateral damage when ICE is engaging in race or targeted immigration enforcement operations. Because regardless of what they are called, we know that anyone who ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time can be picked up by immigration, especially now that every person without status is a priority for deportation. That's why right now we are asking for leadership from our city council leaders in passing a proactive policy that will help define a clear separation between immigration enforcement and law enforcement. Why we need protection so we feel safe out in our community, and why we want Denver to commit to passing a real policy that will make our community feel safer. I wish I were able to testify in person, but unfortunately, I'm already fighting this administration's deportation machine's impact on my own family. Currently, my dad is scheduled to be deported from this country in less than 3 weeks. So I'm putting all my time and energy in getting my dad's stay or removal approved so that he can stay with my mom and all my family members in the country that he has lived, worked, and thrived for the last 24 years. I urge you to vote in favor of this policy so that other families and individuals will not have to live through the struggle and pain of facing deportation. Trying to keep families together with heartless immigration enforcement policies or trying to rip them apart is a very difficult situation to deal with. You have the ability to do something and to stand up for families like mine and for our entire community, as I know this ordinance will make Denver safe. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Marsden? Marsden. Sorry. Are there 2 Sarahs? 2 Sarah Marsden? Sorry. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Marsden. I'll be brief. I was born here in Denver in 1945, and I lived in a neighborhood in South Central Denver where we were all family. We extended all kinds of actions for each other during times of good times and bad times. In 1959, my family hit a crisis. My mother had to call the police. I worry about what would have happened if she had been fearful to call the police. I am fearful of what would have happened if the police had not responded. I feel fearful of what would have happened if the police had not acted in a very professional way to serve us and help us and calm the situation down. And I'm fearful of what would have happened if I'd come home and my mother would have been gone. So with all these things in mind, I would like you to think of this ordinance as a way of protecting the safety and well-being of the people of Colorado, the people of Denver, and the immigrants that are here visiting us, and those who are living here with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And so at this point, we have to end public comment. We will take, so why don't we go into, so we have to do the executive session. We're going to have to go upstairs to 451 to do that. We will take, let's try to do 10 minutes of just, let's have some questions at this point from colleagues, from council members, and then let's try to get into, give us some time with executive session as well. So at this point, Councilman New.
Great. There were, could you go talk a little bit more about the police detention concerns that they had? Has that all been resolved now? Can you talk a little bit about when they stopped someone?
Yeah, I want to be careful here. The administration has spent considerable time with us. We've gotten at least 3 rounds of concerns, but they have been unwilling to propose specific language to us at any point. So what we are trying to do is make changes that we believe respond to their concerns, but we have not received proposed language from them. So I just want to be very clear about that. But our hope is that this resolves it, and I think that's a question, that it resolves that concern. I'm aware of other concerns, but I believe this concern about not being held, I don't believe they could have been held a violation of the current ordinance, but to make it even clearer is something we're very comfortable doing.
I've got a few comments about making sure that this ordinance won't affect the release of any criminal offenders into the public safety issue. And this doesn't change anything that's current law, is that correct?
Well, that's a complicated question, and it takes a number of parts. So first of all, I want to remind everyone that ICE gets a fingerprint, the FBI gets fingerprints for everyone who is registered in our jail, who is booked into our jail. So they immediately know if there is a match to someone that they've been looking for, because there's a process, it's called the Secure Communities Act, so folks can look it up, and that's the booking process at our jail. So that is how they are aware. So I will say this, they currently know everyone who's in our jail that they're looking for, and they will continue to know if there is someone that they are looking for. The way that this bill changes things is it says that it's not our responsibility to take action from there. It means that it's ICE's responsibility. So they can seek a warrant, and they can present that warrant, and they have been known to do that in other jurisdictions that have passed policies like this. We spent some time with Santa Clara supervisors. They rarely get warrants here. They get them more often in places where there's a requirement for a warrant, not surprising. So the bill does say that if someone has committed and been released from a violent felony under Colorado law or a comparable law in another state, that we would share a notification. But again, ICE already does have information on everyone in our jail. So that's the best I can answer your question.
Yeah, so
Last question. There were a couple of suggestions in the executive order recommendation the mayor had about like family support, legal representation, agency coordination, partners. All that can still apply to this bill. We can still do those things to help support, to improve whatever action comes out.
So I want to defer to David, but there are administrative things that were in a draft that was released yesterday. Some of those things might not be things we can legislate on directly, but nothing in our passing the bill would stop the administration from pursuing those. So for example, we can't legislate budget actions, or we don't supervise certain departments, but there is nothing in the bill that would prohibit the administration from pursuing all of those things. So
Yes.
David, can you clarify on the council powers question there?
Again, that's largely correct and a good summary. The draft executive order does some things that are in the nature of like a rule that applies to city employees and officers. Thou shalt not do this or that. But there's a lot in the executive order that is proposed to be programmatic in nature and would not be the sort of thing that would appear in an ordinance, would be in terms of particularly the latter portions of the draft that I've seen. And the councilwoman is exactly correct. If there's going to be anything that involves programmatic funding or anything like that, it's not something that council can self-initiate. It has to come from the executive branch in our form of government.
So this ordinance wouldn't prohibit us from pursuing those improvements?
No.
Right. Thank you.
thank you, Councilman. Councilwoman Black, then Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It sounds like most people's fears are around what happens in the courthouse and what happens when they call law enforcement. And also one of the speakers mentioned someone who was arrested for a traffic violation. And I've met with a lot of people about this, and it's my understanding that you aren't arrested for a traffic violation unless there's a warrant out for your arrest. So I'd like some clarification on that. But then also, what specifically will this do to help to actually make people feel safe when they're in the courthouse or if they're calling the police? Will this bill affect ICE coming into the courthouse?
So let me answer that second one first, because we worked on this bill together. In no way, shape, or form, and our community knows this as well, Councilman, Councilwoman. Are we purporting to protect people in the jail, in a courthouse, in public places, on the streets? We cannot control that. We have no authority over that. What we can do is make it absolutely clear, with our own city resources, with our own police, with our own sheriffs, with our own fire department, with our own agencies, we can determine who and how and where we coordinate with and how we share information. So that has been the intent from the get-go. This is a bill that clarifies. This ordinance clarifies what our role is. If it was ever a question before, which it's obvious it's been a question in the community, there is a lot of distrust. It is real. There's a lot of fear. That is real. It's become more prevalent now than before. That is, I can't be clearer about the intent of the bill. So I do appreciate, there are those fears about the courthouse. We have seen those videos, but this bill is intended on making that clarification. There are some things that are being tested in court in other jurisdictions. We will be mindful and watchful of those. This is a moving target in an ever-changing environment. So I don't know if you wanted to add to that.
No, I think that summarizes it well. On the traffic offenses, what we can do is we can ask the department for a list of arrestable offenses, but driving without a license is a primary example of something that is arrestable. The other thing that occurs is a failure to appear. So even if you may not have an underlying arrest, if you miss a court date because you've moved or you forgot, then the failure to appear becomes arrestable. So we can provide a list to folks and I think get it to you by email afterwards, if that's okay.
That's fine, but that applies to everyone. So
Right.
if I was pulled over and that was the situation with me, I would be arrested also, right?
Yes, I think the main question here is everyone who commits a crime in Denver will be prosecuted, will be held accountable, may have probation consequences where they have to report afterwards. I think the question becomes, is your probation officer going to call ICE and tell them to meet you at your probation appointment? It's really important that people who commit crimes are held accountable. Absolutely. When people are not reporting in for probation or not showing up at court dates, I think that's not a good thing. I mean, this is about protecting victims of crime, but it's also about if you do commit an offense that we hold you accountable and you don't stop showing up to be held accountable. So that's the difference. That's the difference between, folks with a status and without a status.
And so it's my understanding that currently a probation officer, the example you brought up, is not allowed to call ICE.
There is a documented case where a defense attorney received documents where the probation officer in their own report reported that they contacted ICE to notify them about a person.
Okay,
So
but they are not, are they permitted to do that now?
Should we, Mr. Broadwell, you have your...
Without any knowledge of the case that the councilwoman is referring to, let me be clear about this. The ordinance can only regulate the behavior of city and county officers and employees. There are two probation offices working in Denver, one of which is an extension of the state court system. So any anecdotes or any experiences that people have had with the state probation department are not affected by this ordinance. We only have the authority to regulate our own officers and employees. So keep that in mind. There's a much more fulsome active probation office that is an extension of the state that this ordinance will not apply to. Yeah. And I don't know about the specific facts of the case that we're talking about.
Thank you, Councilman Black.
Thank you.
I appreciate that question. Councilwoman Ortega, and are there any other questions? Councilman Brooks? Council President Brooks, sorry.
Mr. Chair, one of my questions was answered about, who ICE will know is actually in our jail, and it's because of the fingerprint system. My next question is about executive orders. So it's not unusual to have an ordinance and an executive order. And executive orders can be removed by any future mayors that may choose not to continue with that same practice or policy. And ordinances are a lot more difficult to remove once you have them in place. So I would be advocating that the ordinance is more it's more important to move forward. It doesn't stop the mayor from moving forward with an executive order as well. But I think that's an important distinction. And I just wanted to share one very quick thought about something that occurred when I was a district council person. We actually had a situation where probation officers had been notified by ICE, who were all being told that they needed to have their clients show up at a particular location, which was a storefront in your district on 52nd and Federal. And basically it was going to be a roundup. And some of the probation officers felt very uncomfortable being asked to do that. Now, in this case, they were state probation officers, but what I understand is somehow the story got leaked to the news media and folks didn't show up. But, you know, the issue of fear is very real. I hear from communities on a daily basis about these concerns, and especially for children. And as we're getting closer to kids going back to school, I think the concerns are real. And I know you're just wanting questions right now. We got to go.
We'll take comments
into
when we come back from
session,
executive session. I just want to make sure we have time to address some of those issues in executive session, so.
We have time for one more question, and then we need to do transport.
Councilman Brooks, and then, and I have heard it on the queue, but I think we got to.
I think this is just, it should be a quick and easy question on notifications. Okay. I'm just wondering what we're changing in the bill. Sheriff's Department, when we're booking, we notify. Do we notify?
Fingerprints are automatically uploaded in a database that they have access to.
Okay. That's how they know. Notification of release.
We currently respond, and we have gotten this in writing, so I feel safe saying this, we currently respond to all requests for notification. You know, the federal government wants 48 hours notice. We don't have control over that, but we provide notification when asked, regardless of what the underlying charge is, regardless of what the immigration status is. We respond to all requests, is what we have been told repeatedly.
Is that the question you have?
Well, yeah, do we notify? We notify.
Upon request, we provide notification by a fax to ICE, which is based on them requesting that fax.
Okay. And
can I just jump in?
Mr. Broadwell.
The question was stated generally. Release notification is what Councilwoman Kinich was responding to. Request for notification about when someone is due to be released from custody is what the bill talks about and would be a change from current practice in terms of what the bill provides. I want to make sure if the question's about like affirmative notification of ICE other than release notification that, hey, we have somebody in custody you might be interested in, that does not occur now. So if that's what you were asking about, that is not currently occurring.
Yeah, and I just wanted to see what this bill, and you clarified it right there about the notification practices, but I think it's very complicated, and we don't really know everything that our sheriff department does in the policy, and so I think that's important for us to know as city council as well. So I just was trying to tease some of that out.
Thank you. Councilman Herndon, I know you had your hand up. Absolutely. Let's take your question and let's make a motion to move.
Thank you,
into
Mr. Chair.
executive
And
session.
it was along the lines, I had the same question that Councilwoman Black had, and maybe she felt as if she got an answer, but I didn't, because I'm hearing that too about ICE presence. And as I was writing down, reading this bill, we're no longer saying you can do in person. Though no one has requested that, they currently can do that now, just phone, but we're taking that away in the jails. But how else is this bill saying to ICE you cannot do X? That's why I just want to make sure I get that clear.
It's a great question. On the police side, this bill, our understanding, everything we've been told, is this bill mostly memorializes existing practices. I have not been able to discover a police practice that this bill will change, but it will be written down for the first time ever in one place. There is many of the things that the police are doing are actually not even in their own policies, they are simply practices. And so they have a few policies, but they don't cover all the things that the bill does. So on the police side, this will be the first time it's written down in one place where I can show someone. That's the change. The change is that I can show someone. On the sheriff's side, there are two changes, and that is the in-person interview and the notification piece. But even on the other side, they have more procedures. But even, for example, the detention policy exists in memos. I can't point to even a policy about not violating the Fourth Amendment that we've adopted. So on the sheriff's side, again, there is this need to be able to show folks what we're doing.
I understand. And this is it, Mr. Chair. And I know this is new, but the XO that has been proposed, I'm assuming would do that as well. And we don't have time for that. Maybe that's an executive session question. I'll just follow up later on. Whatever, because I think that was a concern. We don't have those listed, and that's my understanding of what that would propose. But we can certainly. I didn't know if any of you all have had closer
Can
conversations.
you ask
than
that
me.
question again after the executive
Sure,
session?
absolutely.
And
Yeah.
I think we should answer it. I can answer some of the differences.
So, and I know we have other questions. I just want to be mindful of time and respectful of folks' time and then our schedule. We'll take the rest of the questions. So before we move into executive sessions, I failed to say that there was 19 speakers that had signed up in total. We heard from a few, and all of them were speaking for or in favor of. There has been none against or opposed or none that were undecided or neither. So.
Mr. Chair, I move for an executive session for confidential legal advice.
Second.
We are going to relocate. We will be back shortly.
Can we get clarification as to specific clarification? I'm sorry, I'm representing.
Oh, the purpose of the executive session.
As to the purpose for the executive session.
So,
David?
Mr. Broadwell, you want to state the purpose of the executive session, please?
For matters of attorney-client privilege for me to render confidential legal advice.
Can you be more specific than that?
That's all I need to say.
Get all council members sitting down. Can we get everybody settled? All right. Council members here?
We're waiting on a few more.
Okay.
We're all coming back.
Yeah, yeah.
I think you can make it.
Okay, so thank you. We are going to come back into open session. So what we'll do is we're going to have a question and comment, hear from council members, hear from colleagues and then we're going to check. I'm going to check it 15 minutes, and at the pleasure of this council, we'll decide to go from there. So, or the committee anyway. So, question, comments from members of council. Councilwoman Sussman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just sort of a general question, are we going to be having a time to discuss the executive order, the differences between that order, the differences between what an executive order does and this bill? So just a general discussion. I sure would like to hear others' questions that they have.
Well, we weren't approached at the committee to actually have it's a draft. What I understand is a draft executive order. We weren't approached to have it a part of the committee for discussion. What we are discussing is this bill. And I could say that they are two separate things. They're not the same thing in different forms. They're completely two separate ways to go about it, two separate directions. So we weren't approached about that, Mary Councilwoman Sussman.
So we are not going to discuss the executive order here?
I can certainly, if folks want to ask about a difference between the draft, but here's the challenge. As Councilman mentioned, it is a draft. We've already been told it has changed. So again, and there was no formal process shared with us about how they plan to proceed. So I think I can certainly share how our bill differs from the draft that is out in the public realm, but if that's helpful to folks, I'm happy to answer a few of those about what the differences are. Would that be helpful, even though
it's like if we don't know what the draft final is, that we might be discussing things that are no longer in it. So
that's my fear.
And here's the other thing, Councilwoman. I mean, we absolutely respect the administration's powers, their direction, their right to do it. We barely learned about it when everybody else did. We knew this from Monday night, Tuesday night. This bill has been in front of us. We've been working on this. We've brought it to committee. It's been posted. The meeting has been posted with the intent of discussing the Public Safety Enforcement Priorities Act. I mean, I understand where you're coming with it.
Right.
We weren't asked either. So
I understand too that. Give us a little bit of timeline. I know that you shared that with me, Robin. Will you tell us the timeline for this particular ordinance?
Yes. So we had purposely built some extra time in the calendar for additional ideas and conversations. So if the committee moves the bill today, we would still hold filing it, and next week would be an off week to allow, because particularly we have non-voting committee members, right? So that's always a challenge for folks who don't get to vote. If they needed more briefings or time that they needed, more time to follow up. And then we would file the bill for the purposes of bringing it to first reading on the 21st of August and second reading on the 28th of August with a public hearing on the 28th. The reason the public hearing would be scheduled on the 28th is because we already have a long night on the 21st. And so for both the council and the public, it seemed better to do it on a night when it was shorter. So the public hearing would be on second reading. But there is additional time in that calendar for folks who are not on the committee particularly to spend time with agencies, continuing dialogue. We are happy to continue our dialogue with the administration. We met with the mayor. We would be happy to do that again. So that time was built in intentionally.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Councilman. Councilman Clark, Herndon, Espinoza, then Black.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just have comments. Is that okay to go into comments?
Yeah.
Okay. I wanted to start by thanking you, Councilman Lopez, Councilwoman Kinich, for your leadership on this, for working with the community and with the administration. I know there have been changes and tweaks and concessions made due to all of that feedback. So I just really wanted to thank you for your leadership in getting us here. I also really want to thank everyone from the community who came out and everyone from the community who is watching and following this and reaching out to me, and really to the people who did get the opportunity to speak today and who have spoken to me personally in meetings or one-on-one, for giving a face to this issue. A lot of times we sit around and we bandy about the law and what does this happen here, and we get stuck in the weeds and we forget that this is really about people. And this is about our friends and our neighbors. This is about the kids in the class with my kids at school. These are the kids that my wife teaches in the Denver Public Schools. This is our community, and one of the speakers said something about family. You know, we're all one big family in Denver, and one big community, and that's what this is really about. And I really appreciate everyone who is coming and reminding us as we get into the legislative side of this and creating a bill that this is about all of you, but it's really about all of us. I appreciate everything that the administration has done and continues to work on. I look forward to seeing the executive order, and I think that an executive order that complements this and does things that we can't legislative is very welcome. But this should be in ordinance. This should be in law. That's the statement that we need to make to our family, our community in Denver. And so I'm very supportive of this. This bill, as we've seen, it does not violate any laws. It is in line with the Constitution. And more than that, it's the right thing to do. And I am remiss that I'm not a voting member of this committee, because if I were, I would resoundingly and unequivocally vote yes to move this out of committee and on to council. And I would ask that the voting members do that so that we can have this discussion on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Herndon, then Espinoza, then Black, then Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate this dialogue as well. And I think that because of this, we've come to a place where we've had the opportunity to see how can we better serve our community. And the speaker talked about what's our number one goal. I always believe it's public safety. That's what I think we should do as local government, public safety. And there's a question of, does this bill, as currently written, make us safer? Which is why I want to make sure when people keep having questions about ICE, where does this prevent ICE from doing? And that's why I asked that question twice to make sure I got a good answer. And I'm not suggesting that this bill doesn't make us safer, but I do believe that there are some unintended consequences that we should fully vet as a council. As the expression goes, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Because we're not going to stop ICE from being as part of the city. And if you turn around and thumb your nose at them by saying you can't do something, what will their response be? And I am fearful and I have concerns how that may make some people of our community less safe. And I'm not suggesting that we'll do that, but I'm interested in having a further conversation about that, because that's certainly something I would not want to do. But I also think, too, if this ordinance was the only option at the table, it would certainly be something we would need to move forward. But there's another option, and granted, it came at the 11th hour in an executive order. I would really be interested in seeing what that XO would do. And if it's a matter of, and it seems as if there's time built in, which I'm comfortable with, to say, okay, what does the ordinance do? What does the XO do? And just line them up next to each other. And as a council, we can explore two different options versus just having one in front of us. So I hope that we have that time to do that, whether it be in committee or just if the administration feels strongly about an XO, please get it to council so that we can see what that proposed XO would do and the differences between the two. Because as I go back to, I want to make sure whatever we put in front, whether it's an XO, it protects the public safety of this community. And that's the most important thing that I want to make sure we focus on. So I'm a non-voting member, Mr. Chair, so I just hope that we'll have that opportunity to see both options, what they do not do, and be able to make an informed decision either way. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilman Espinosa, then Black, then Flynn, and then
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize that I'm going to have to split, but so I'm going to jump right into comments. I'm going to go get prepared for a 12:15 committee of one. I encourage you all to catch us in the process as soon as you leave here to talk about urban design, which is sort of on the other end of the spectrum when we're talking a sort of base human, need versus, our built environment. Anyway, I basically want to encourage this committee, the voting members of this committee, to move this forward so that council can debate it and consider it on the floor. I think it's interesting that there's historic religious texts. I'll leave it to the theologians to tell me how many of our base religions have commented on the morality of sort of honoring people, regardless of where they're from. But I would bet that it's the majority of them. So it's taken us this many thousands of years to actually memorialize it in an ordinance at the city of Denver. So I applaud the sponsors for the work that they've done and the courage that they've shown in bringing forward a measure like this. An ordinance like this, the adaptability that they've shown in trying to accommodate the many disparate needs and requests that have come at them, the pressure that they felt internally and externally to get to where to the language that's been crafted. Along those lines, if the administration does have an XO that is wildly better and they can do it in far less time, then sure, come forward with that. But, that doesn't impede and shouldn't impede this effort because this one has been worked on just as hard, if not harder. And the real beauty of it is actually both could support each other. And so, wow, what would it be if we took council considered this, if they chose to act and move it and adopt it, and an XO sort of added more potency to this request. So with that, I do encourage members of this committee to move it to council. I do believe it's ready for council, even in its current form. I won't be here for any amendments, but hopefully they are also on par. So thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Councilwoman Black.
Thank you, and thank you for your great comments. Like everyone here, I'm really passionate about everyone in Denver and our immigrant community and keeping them safe. It is a top priority for everyone in this room. I want to be very clear about that. And I totally am in support of the spirit of the ordinance. I don't feel like we've had enough time with it, and there's a lot of unanswered questions. I've spent the past few weeks talking with law enforcement, with legal experts, with immigration advocates to try and learn more. I'm concerned about some of the implications, as Councilman Herndon said, what negative implications might there be for the very people we're trying to protect. I've read some of the things that Thomas Holman has said, and they make me very concerned, especially since the ordinance as Councilman Herndon just said, does not prevent ICE from going into courthouses, and it does not prevent them from going into schools. And so I don't want to ever give anyone a false sense of security, because it won't stop that. And that makes me very nervous if we tick them off. So I would love to have another committee meeting about it and hear the pros and cons of an executive order versus an ordinance. I really appreciate some of the substantive things we've done, like the sentencing reform has been very meaningful. So as I said, I'm fully supportive of the spirit of it, but I would like to learn a little bit more. And I did just learn in executive session that it won't prevent ICE from calling the courthouse and asking when someone is going to be released. I don't believe that was confidential, was
But
it?
you guys, yeah.
Oh. Oh, it was?
So why don't we, thank you, Councilwoman. Councilman
it?
Flynn, and then Cashman,
Thank you.
and you.
Excuse me. I actually have some questions because we've met before. You know, I try to be very data-driven, and I very much support the current policies and how the ordinance keeps those in place. So I try to focus on the things that we're trying to change with the ordinance. And when you boil it down, we're not making any changes that will provide the safety and security that I heard the folks ask for in the community. The woman, the translator, whose client was picked up at a court hearing, is there anything in this bill that would have stopped that?
We've had a briefing, and we've told you that that wasn't the intent nor the case.
Right. That's
That's
what
not
I'm
the
getting
intent
at,
of the bill.
because as Councilwoman Black said, I think it's providing a false sense of security that this activity will be reduced. So I want to focus on things that this will change, not what we're currently doing.
Yeah.
When we had the problem with heroin dealing on Cherry Creek, I believe the council knew it was in your district, or it might have been in the downtown district.
Thank you for reminding me.
And DPD went in and did a sweep and tried to clean up all the heroin dealing that was occurring down there. ICE participated in that for a certain period of time, but then they were asked to leave. And so I'm wondering, would this ordinance, the cooperation that we're talking about, rewriting that section, would that go back and permit ICE to participate in those kinds of heroin sweeps? You know, it's a serious problem that we're having here. And they were participating, and then they were asked to leave. Would the rewrite of that section allow us to cooperate with ICE in that kind of an enforcement?
Yeah.
I'm going to
Defer to
take this
Councilwoman
question.
Roberts.
I actually don't know that the facts that you've described are correct, and I'm going to give the chief a chance to decide whether he wants to publicly comment or not. But I did ask them for a statement about this, and they emailed it. I sent it to you, Councilman, but that ICE has asked to participate, and they have been declined based on the fact that they did not have a warrant, and that has been the practice. And they did clarify that the change in the ordinance, and I can point it to you, this is about joint task forces. The question is if it's a gang or a drug task force. And the statement was added to section 250C. So we are on page 4 of the ordinance. Makes clear that law enforcement can participate with joint task forces as long as the primary purpose is enforcement of city, state, or federal criminal law. So I don't want the media or the public in the room. I think this is more what has happened in past enforcement actions is not what the statement I received from the Chief Quinones read. It read that they had requested participation and DPD had declined because they did not have a criminal warrant. And so, but there is the potential for joint enforcement actions as long as the purpose is criminal. And that was an email statement that you have in your box from the chief. So if he wishes
So could they?
I will, if he wishes to comment, he may, but.
So my question is, under this change, would they be allowed to participate in that kind of an action when we're trying to clear up the heroin dealing down on the
They
Cherry
aren't
Creek bypass?
participating in those actions today, Councilman.
Right. But would they be able to?
without getting into who's running the task force and hypothetically how many agencies are involved, I think we can't answer that question. If the primary purpose of the enforcement action is criminal law and it's a joint enforcement action with federal agencies, so is ATF involved? Is the FBI involved? All those questions would have to be answered, but I think that the most important thing is that is not happening today. They have answered this question for us at least 2 times now in writing. It is not happening today. So to imply that it would change something, I think is inaccurate.
Well, it would change if they could.
So,
No, I'm not saying the ordinance
Yeah.
changes that.
I don't wanna
I'm
talk
saying
about
they did
hypotheticals.
participate earlier,
Right.
and they were,
Right.
then they were denied. Would this ordinance, would this allow them to come back in under a joint task force?
Yeah,
That was the
it
question.
depends on whether,
Okay.
the way the ordinance is written is if it is a joint enforcement action with a federal law enforcement agency.
Okay.
Right, so
Very
those
good.
questions would have to be answered.
Okay, I think that's yes then. The data I got from the sheriff regarding courthouse sign-ins by ICE actually shows that there's been a decline in the number of ICE visits to our courthouses, Lindsay Flanagan and over here, since January, since the new administration. There's actually been fewer than there were in 2016. But I don't have data yet, and I need data to tell what kind of an impact this bill would have on how many detainer requests have been sent from ICE to the jail in 2016 up to the present time. How many detainer requests have there been? How many would be impacted by the change where we're only going to honor those that relate to people convicted of violent felonies within the last 7 years only? So I'm trying to understand what will this impact, how many will this impact?
So we're not the custodians of that data, as you
But
know,
we-
as fellow
But we
council.
did ask
but
for
we
it.
did
So
ask.
the answer was they didn't keep records before the recent 6 months. So when we asked Andrea Albo with the sheriff's office, who I think is behind me, the answer was we get about 15, and I just want to say detainer notification requests.
Yes.
That we receive about 15 a month, but they did not keep records previously. So and again, our purpose is not to change the number of requests ICE makes or the number of folks it looks for. That is their role, their decision. They know everyone in our jail. So we can't produce data on what this ordinance will change because that's not what the ordinance is aiming at
Okay,
changing.
let's move on.
That's a problem.
Okay, look, I want to get to everybody that's on my queue. I want to be respectful of every question, but I
Come
also
back
want to
to
be
me then.
respectful of timing.
Thank you.
Councilman Cashman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. To address Councilman Espinoza's comments about if there's an executive order that is wildly better, sure. I think if there's an executive order wildly better, I would invite the administration to partner with us in crafting it into ordinance. For me, one of the main differences with an executive order, as we've seen with the change in Washington, is we've watched this administration with the scribble of a pen undo so much in a heartbeat that President Obama took 8 years to create. The crafting of ordinance, while it can also be undone, is a far more inclusive, involved process. And I think it's important that we put this in ordinance. It's far too important. It is a state. It's a far deeper statement of intention of this council and this city on how we view our immigrant refugee community. The vast body of American citizens are good people, and there are some wrongdoers in that body, and the vast majority of our refugee immigrant community are good people, and there are some wrongdoers in that body as well. And I don't know anyone at this table that has any real interest in taking people who are true dangers to our community and are in no way participating in the country that we're trying to craft and give them safe harbor. But at the same time, I think we need to push things forward to protect those who are not a danger to our community and who are intent on furthering what we hold as basic principles of the country that we want to be. As far as inciting ICE
to come down on our refugee immigrant population, please, there's no way to predict what this administration is going to do. Whatever we decide to do, they'll change the rules in any way we want, and I don't think we can waste our time trying to crystal ball what Washington's going to do. I think it's essential that we decide what we want to be as a city and take that. And take actions in that direction. And this bill doesn't give the ultimate safety I wish we could create for our citizens, but I believe it is a responsible move forward. And Mr. Chairman, as you know, I've spent a lot of time on some other issues, one of which is trying to bring comprehensive improvements to the sidewalks in our city, in our neighborhoods. And I would like, if that is a successful initiative down the road, that people in all our neighborhoods will feel free to come out of their houses and walk on those sidewalks rather than stay behind closed doors. So I am a voting member of this committee, and I will look forward. I think I appreciate that the sponsors, yourself and Councilwoman Kinich, have built in added times, because I honor the complexities, and to leave room for challenge, for amendment, right? But I will look forward to moving this forward to the full committee, full council. Thank you.
Councilwoman Ortega, Councilwoman Gilmore and Ortega.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First I'd like to thank, of course, the bill sponsors and the administration for their partnership in answering questions. And specifically, I want to really thank David Broadwell, because we've had lots of conversations on the phone and the executive sessions, and I just appreciate your clarity around this topic. And, in reflecting on where I was going to stand on this ordinance, being elected by the people of District 11, I am elected to represent their voice. And I also need to represent who my family is and who I am as well. And my 3 kids are Spanish, Greek, Mexican, Black, and Japanese. Their ancestors are the very immigrants and refugees who I represent in my council district, which is 50% Latino, and in Montbello specifically, it's 61.4% Latino, and African American, it's 25%. In my community, we are immigrants, refugees, and we pride ourselves on our diversity and inclusivity. We have a right, everyone has a right, to live in a society, a city, and a community that is safe from fear. That is a basic human right. We live in a time where fear and hate are driving our public policy at the federal level, and we must strive and work towards immigration policy reform for a whole nation. But we cannot wait. We have talked about this. We have been reactionary. We cannot wait. In our democracy, we have a right as a local municipality to decide what laws we are going to have to govern how we operate and move forward. I have dear friends who I consider as valued parts of my family who are right now living in fear. They're innocent. They're at fear of being deported. Their children, fathers, mothers, grandparents, innocent people who have come to our country or who maybe were born in our country, and they are only here to pursue their dreams. They want safety, and they want the opportunity to go through legal channels to become a citizen of the United States. They're not presented with those opportunities right now. And I've gone back and forth a lot because I share my colleagues' concerns about creating a false sense of security. We have folks in our community who do not feel secure at all. There is nothing that we could do that's going to stop ICE, that we're going to keep them out of our public places. But what we can do is to make sure that citizens in our city know that we're backing them up. We know that we're hearing them, and we know that we're not going to allow them to be persecuted or bullied or live in fear because we are afraid to act. And so I am supportive of this bill as it is presented to us today, and I would be fine moving it forward to the full council so we can debate it more. But I will go ahead and end there and just thank you both for your leadership on this. And thank you, Mr. Chair.
You make a brother cry right here. Councilman Ortega.
Thank you,
Sorry.
Mr. Chair. I am not a current voting member of this committee. I will be in the next round of committee assignments as those go into effect. But I just want to clarify that this process of looking at what kind of safeguards, if you will, that we put into place for our community was really on the heels of many of the community meetings that were happening around the city after we saw the executive order that was passed by President Trump, and just the concerns and the fears that we heard all around this city when public meetings were held, some of them by the mayor. The first one I went to was at North High School, and we heard testimonies from many, many people who, you know, are living in fear. And if they weren't already, this certainly elevated it. So this is an important step for us to move forward by codifying what our actions are, what we do as a city, and it's addressing the behaviors of our city agencies. We know we have no jurisdiction over ICE and their behaviors, but we do of our own city agencies. And to put that into writing is important, and that's part of the safeguard that we put into place for our citizens. So, you know, it's not typical that city council has input into executive orders. Typically, that's an authority that previous and current mayor, our current mayor has to put together an executive order. And I think there's been a lot of work done in getting this language to this point, and it's important to move it forward regardless of whatever executive order the mayor chooses to bring forward. And that doesn't have to be approved by city council. They are not approved by city council. So I just think it's time, and let's move it forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilman Brooks?
Yep. Day after the election, Kenya Brooks, my middle daughter, was doing the Pledge of Allegiance, and she sat down with some other young women in her class and said, you know, number one, I'm upset that our country, I'm not proud of my country right now, that they would elect someone like this. And number two, we're missing 7 young girls in our class because they're scared to go to school. And so immediately, our office put out a value statement that we will be about protecting our community through the constitutionality that we have in this country. And this is, to me, one of the first steps that we're doing this. And I'm so proud. I'm so proud of us as a city taking this step. I've been talking to my colleagues all over the country who are doing this as well. It's a little different because they're not a city and a county, right? They don't have the jails. But it's powerful that the city of Denver is taking this step. And, you know, it's important that we don't give out false hopes, but it is clear that we have policies that are in place, that are in the back of policy manuals. Folks can't find it. This is an opportunity for us to memorialize it. And this is an opportunity for us, number two, to affirm that we will not stand with the federal government and their unconstitutional request of our immigrants in our community.
Thank you. So you have, sorry. I'm sorry. I thought you were ending. Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Always end on the applause
ahead.
line.
Go ahead.
You're killing me. I'm deeply passionate about this and so excited that that my colleagues, Councilwoman Kinich, Councilman Lopez, you've been talking about this for a long time, and David. There's a lot of complexity around this. There's a lot of moving parts. We have a crazy person in office that is literally putting threats that are unconstitutional to cities, and it's really hard. But you all stepped up, and this is great. So let me just a couple facts out there that a lot of folks don't know about why this is so important. Since January, deportations are up 40%, reported by the New York Times. Since January, they are up 40% nationwide. Because ICE now, what they can do now at their discretion is deport folks. Where in the Obama administration, there was a certain level of standards. And so this is incredibly important to us. And to the District 9 folks, I just want to, I did a little poll, and I just wanted to see where folks were in District 9. And I think this is very important for people to hear where my District 9 people were, if I can find it. So basically, 65% of District 9 folks agree that we need to memorialize this language, and we need to close some of the gaps that were recognized in this ordinance. And so I'll be voting in favor of this. I think there still are some issues we need to talk about. Everybody needs to get their questions answered. This is extremely complex. But I'll be voting for this to take it to the floor and have a robust conversation about the importance of passing this. Thank you.
So, thank you, Councilman. Let me, in the interest of time, and I thank you everybody for sticking around a little longer. Let me just add on to that, and then I'll pass on to my colleague. Is there a question, a comment?
This is the time for committee work. We don't do committee work on the floor. I just had a few more questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Absolutely.
How will we measure the success of this down the road? How will we know that this has been successful? Do we have any hard numbers that we can? That's the thing that's troubling me about it. I hate that good people, like the woman who got deported when she showed up at traffic court, I hate that ICE took her.
Yeah.
And nothing, I don't see anything in this bill that would have made her feel safer to show up or to report down the road, or anybody in the community here. They're still going to do that. The only thing that this changes is we're not going to tell ICE when we're releasing a heroin dealer from the jail, or people convicted of felonies that are less, or held on felonies that are less than the violent ones that we're limiting it to. So I really think it's a false hope. I would support doing more work to find a way that we could actually impact so that we're not deporting the people who show up at traffic court. Those are the people who need to feel safe. I don't want a heroin dealer to feel safe. I want the hardworking people in my district, in your district, and everywhere to feel safe. And I don't think that I don't have numbers that show me that this does it.
Okay.
So I want to know, what are the measures of success? How will we know that this works?
That's absolutely fair, Councilman. Robin's signaling me about, Councilman Kinich, I'm sorry.
Councilman, with all humility, I would say that the people who are impacted are telling us it matters to them.
Yes.
And if it's good enough for them, it's good enough for me. So I can't measure the data of people's trust in local government, right? We have polling, but I don't know that Spanish-speaking immigrants or African-speaking immigrants and Vietnamese immigrants answer polls, right? And so I can't measure the degree. But when they tell me it's important and it matters to them, it's not my position to decide for them that it's not good enough, therefore it shouldn't be done. So I'm following the lead of the people who are impacted, and if they tell me it matters, we measure very little of what we can in the world of government and civil rights, So that's my guidance in this case.
So if we were codifying existing policy and elevating it into ordinance, I could support that. But we're adding these elements where we are elevating the number of people accused of felonies that we're not informing ICE, but we're not doing anything to help the person in Harvey Park, who I found out came here at the age of 13 and got deported over a traffic violation.
Yeah,
I'd rather stop that.
Councilman, point well taken, right?
Okay.
You raise a question, it's not falling on deaf ears. We have time to actually ask those kind of questions. I mean, this is all new to us, and it's ever-changing, as you said. So we you know, those kind of questions, I bet you there's even more questions that we're going to keep asking. I don't even know who the Secretary of the Press will be in 2 weeks, right? So, I mean, that there's a lot of different questions, right? So here we go. Let me just end with this, and let's move forward. I put myself last in the queue because I want folks to be able to express their concerns and stuff. Look, I understand the concerns. I understand the worries in this table, in the room, in our city. I get it. To say we have not had enough time couldn't be more wrong. We have had a lot of time. We began with this bill while there was a lot of worries in our community. There have been a lot of meetings in our community about this that have been made public, that members of this body have been invited to. Councilwoman Kinich and I have been working on this bill since April. And in that time, we have asked for input. We have invited the administration to the table. We have met multiple times. We have asked for language. We have asked for help with that bill. And what you have before you is a representation of that hard work. It's a representation of that collaboration. It's a representation. The fact that a lot of people in the community weren't on board and that they wanted to do a heck of a lot more, but they came on board because they have faith in what we are doing, because they have trust in what we are doing. And I don't want to let that down. That's what this bill represents in front of you. It is not, and it's not just something that comes out of the blue and dropped on us in a couple of days. We have been working on this for a very long time with one of the best lawyers that I've ever worked with, not only with Mr. Broadwell, Councilwoman Kinich. We have made sure that all the concerns that we have heard in this process, very many of them, you see the changes there are in here. It is an excellent bill that represents an excellent community and an excellent city. Let me just say this. There is nothing false about the intent of this bill. There's nothing false about the hope of the people in this room or in our communities. And Councilwoman Kinich, you put it, you nail it on the head. If it's good enough for them, if it's good enough for the folks who are living in the shadows, knowing, and we can't patronize folks in the community not knowing the difference. There are a lot of people that know what's going on in this city, know their rights, and know, what they should be able to do. And one of those things is calling the police. It's calling the fire department. It's walking into the Department of Human Services to ask for help or to report child abuse. It's those kind of things. It is that restoration of faith in our government. And to be quite honest, look, I don't like bullies. And we're being bullied. And we're watching our community be bullied. And not just some of us, but all of us. And as I've said before, if we don't stand up to bullies, if we don't correct those bullies, pretty soon there's not going to be enough people to stand up for you and I. And that's how bullies operate. If we have set a process, what we're doing here is we're creating a process that if somebody is interested in one of those folks that you speak of that presents that threat, show us a warrant. Do what every law enforcement agency is required under the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution and show us a warrant. There is no exception to the Constitution when it says that. There is no agency that's exception to that Constitution. Show us the warrant. We will gladly work with you. So having said that, Councilwoman Kinich, do you want to wrap it up?
With deep respect for each of the people at the table and for our attorney, David Broadwell, who has shared not just legal expertise but wisdom, and to my co-sponsor, it is my honor to move the adoption of Bill 857 with an amendment to Section 250, Section 5, that would clarify that waiting to clear probable cause or criminal warrants is not a violation of this ordinance. And with that, I make that motion for adoption with an amendment.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Roll call.
Lopez.
Aye.
Cashman.
Aye.
Flynn.
No.
Gilmore.
Aye.
Kanish.
Aye.
New.
Aye.
Brooks.
Aye.
Recording the vote.
Results.
And we have 6. It moves out of committee with 1.